so glad you are here again with us. Last week, we discussed saying hello to reality. So this week, we want to discuss fantasy versus reality.
Fantasy?
I don't know. I've never had any of those. I've always had my feet so firmly planted in reality.
And that's not sarcastic either, right?
Maybe not. Maybe I've had my own ideas of what I thought reality might have looked like. Oops.
Well, and that's the part about coming out of denial. We were talking about how reality can be totally fake.
Yeah.
Our reality. And that's also known as fantasy. So we're going to be talking about how we need to see the difference between fantasy and reality and how that works. And let's just mention real quick the assessment that we had everybody do last week. And that's a very difficult thing, and also the denial worksheet, which again is trying to get yourself planted in reality. But we're aware, having both written and taken the assessment, that can be a pretty intense experience. And so we want to let you know that we understand. We've been praying for you, and we really, really care that you've taken another step closer to reality, even though that can be a very difficult.
And they came back for another week.
Evidently, that's pretty amazing, isn't it?
That is the first step.
Mm-hmm. So our lesson today, we're talking about the fact that damage comes in different ways and how that affects our abilities to perceive reality and our abilities to understand things. And one of the things that really made a big difference for me in that understanding was how childhood damage affects our emotional development. Mm-hmm. Because that affects what we perceive as reality. And in my case, because the damage started when I was 2, I had areas of trauma where if I was in the right trigger position, I would go to a nonverbal shutdown, and I didn't understand. I just thought I was going crazy, except that I wasn't crazy. I was dealing with a trauma trigger that was super severe and going there, because when that happens, it's like you have an emotional growth plate, like a bone that's broken at the growth plate, then that part of that bone just doesn't grow. So if it happens when you're 2, that really messes up that arm's development. If that growth plate is broken at 18 and you're fully grown, it still does damage, but it doesn't stunt the growth the same way.
Right.
So we've experienced that kind of thing at different levels. Ginny, your arm.
This little thing?
Yeah, that.
Yeah, this was not broken, but how God designed me. But it definitely will never grow back, at least this side of heaven. I don't expect it to. I'm not sure I want it to. But this, I did need some help, and I chose to wear some help. Something that would help me to grow and develop in ways that I couldn't. So some of us just need that extra help getting along.
Right, and there's a lot of times when we've each taken different steps in an area where we didn't develop naturally.
Right.
Your arm did not, in your mother's stomach, your arm did not grow the way the other one did. But it can happen through damage. It can happen through circumstances that didn't nurture and grow things. Mm-hmm. It can happen in our emotions where there's damage that stops growth, that it just doesn't develop properly. But the cool thing is that we can do something about it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right, Evonna?
Yes. Well, and I was also going to say that there's actual neurological damage to our neuro pathways when we experience trauma at a young age. So, or any age really. So we actually are going to go through a process of rewiring our brain. So as we renew our mind, we're also going to be rewiring our brain, which is really exciting for the therapist here.
Well, I love how science and God's truth all works together. The renewing of the mind, and how when we are focusing on the truths of the Bible, and we're focusing on healing through biblical means and through prayer, it actually does physically, scientifically rewire our brain. I love that. It's all connected, and it's all based in reality.
And not in a fantasy world.
Not in a fantasy world at all. But we do have to be aware that, for Paula, for you, the damage was so early in your life that the recovery process is going to be a little bit longer because of that. similar to the growth plate. So it's not that you can't heal from that, right? Because sometimes with the growth plate, it doesn't grow back, but you are just going to take a little bit longer. Or anyone who's experienced it earlier or had more traumas, that recovery process is going to look longer. And so giving ourselves grace for that and understanding that that's going to be the journey ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to say we have the time, and then we also have severity. So depending on what kind of abuse, or like we said about the length of time, how often or how frequent the abuse was taking place. You know, if you're thinking of a child who is at home in an abusive situation and they're being abused on a daily basis, and maybe that's just one type, and then they go to school and they're getting a different type of abuse from a teacher or a leader or whatever, they're just compounding that. And so it's going to take longer, but there is hope and there is healing available.
And there is. And sometimes that hope and healing may feel more mechanical or less natural because it didn't develop properly. Like I remember, because I didn't understand social interactions due to my childhood, due to having been a part of a cult, different things, I actually had to go watch movies and read books and talk to people to understand the social dynamics of things that in a healthy way, because I had no frame of reference. It wasn't the before this is how it's supposed to be, and now I can go back to that. I had nowhere to go to understand how that should work, how my development should have grown, how my relationship should progress, how to set boundaries, how to, just so many things in my life I didn't understand. And
because
so
it hadn't been modeled for you.
No, I didn't see it. I didn't understand that. So it was realizing that I could learn it, relearn it. Like if somebody's in a car accident and they have brain damage and they have to learn to talk again and walk again and reprocess things, I was having to go back to some basics and learn them from a 2-year-old's perspective and start growing up in a trained way, choosing to grow up. I think I'm older now.
I was going to say, that's a really good word, too, that you said you chose to grow up.
Yes.
So we have to, it's about how much time we invest in it and how much effort we're putting into our healing. For me, when I first went to treatment for my eating disorder, I thought I was ready, and I thought I was ready to invest in that healing, but I wasn't. And so through a course of events, insurance said, "You're out, chick. You're not getting any more help."
Oh my goodness.
And then I had to go back. And the second time I went back, I was much more invested and ready to heal. Right. And so we all have to look around and say, okay, and look deep in ourselves. Am I ready to heal? Am I ready to really work on me?
Right. Dive in, really invest, be intentional about leaning into the pain rather than trying to work on things on the surface.
Yes.
Getting ready to lean in, go into all that tension and all that craziness, because it's so worth it at the end of it.
Absolutely.
It absolutely is.
And other people wanting you to heal doesn't help you heal for you.
What?
Like you have to choose it for yourself. You have to choose it for yourself. You have to want that healing for yourself. Yeah. I had to choose for myself. I want to heal. I am willing to do the work. I am willing to do the hard things and to follow the leadership of those who knew. And even then, I realized I had to really understand I needed grace for myself and give myself space and time and take it in bite-sized pieces and work through the baby steps like we talk about, because the damage did not happen overnight for me. Right. And it was very intense with sexual abuse and physical abuse and spiritual abuse and settings that were messed up. So it was having to do a lot of work over time to heal and grow and change. And I just love the fact that God put the people in place to help me, and that then I could choose. Okay, and even with that, deliberately choosing healing, it's been 10.5 years. And I'm so excited to be where I am, but I still have more healing I want to do. Right. I want to grow and heal more, which is an ongoing lifetime thing, I think.
Yeah. So we have strategy number 6, which is grace for realistic recovery. We have to be real about where we're at and give ourselves grace. And my counselor would tell me all the time, Evonna, you give your clients, counselees, a lot of grace, but you're very judgmental towards yourself. I'm a counselor. I should have it all together. I should know better. I should.
Sounds like you're shoulding
all over myself. I am. And so that strategy number 6 is something I still have to remind myself, is that I have to have grace for realistic recovery.
Right, and God does the miraculous, which helps in that realistic recovery. We get to invite him in and have that miraculous aspect of the healing. But even then, renewing your mind and walking through the pieces with God's help, with a support system, it is still a process. And I love the fact that we're getting to share so many of the things that we've learned over a long time and do it in a manageable way. And
I feel like the process of recovery is up and down and up and down. And even on a daily basis, it can feel like. And it feels like, especially at the beginning, you are pushing a boulder uphill.
Yes.
And you feel like you're never going to get to the top of that hill some days. And how I kind of imagine the process for myself, and when I work with clients as well, how I see their process going is it's kind of it's up down, it's up down, it's up down, but then they start to get a little bit stronger, and it's up down up here, and then it's up down up here. So it just keeps moving, but it's a fluid. So if you have a bad day, don't throw the whole process out. Just keep moving one day at a time, one baby step at a time. You are going to get there. And eventually when you get to the top of that hill, you start to see, wow, I've really made some changes, and it starts to get easier. It starts to feel like you're pushing the boulder on a plateau and then maybe a little bit downhill. So keep going. It does get better, and give yourself grace, especially for those bad days.
Yeah.
which is why we want to talk about strategy 7, which is progress, not perfection.
Ouch.
Amen.
Yeah, for perfectionists, that can be a hard one to believe and understand.
Perfectionism was the very first thing that I worked on in my recovery process, was because I was very black and white thinking. And the idea of making progress rather than just I should be perfect because I know what perfection is, so I should be there. I know that doesn't work. I needed to get used to that process of gray areas and progress, baby steps.
Oh, I definitely had to work through some major black and white thinking, and perfectionism is still something I work on.
Well, I think that's a long-term journey, especially if you're trained in it.
Yeah.
It's not just I want to do well or I want to protect myself by doing well. But when you've been trained in it, you can think not only you have to do well, but you have to make everybody else around you do well.
Yes.
And for me, that kind of developed this God complex, codependent thing that was saying, oh, I've got to do everything perfectly. And then if I'm not getting you to do it perfectly too, then that's my fault and my problem. Until one day I was talking to my sister and older sister, and she's like, Paula, I just need to tell you, you're not God.
Was that a revelation?
And I was like, well, I was so shocked. I'm like, I don't think I'm God. I don't think that, of course I'm not God. And she's like, but when you're taking responsibility for other people's choices and actions, trying to manage them and manipulate it and organize and just make them all do it right too, that's a problem. And that's causing damage. And so it was this huge revelation to me that I needed to shift my thinking and shift from this perfectionistic God complex type thing.
Control fantasy.
There was that. It was one of those things.
That you could control everyone else, that you could control your family, that you could control how people saw you. I know for me, I wanted to control how everyone saw me. If I could just manage their expectations and all of that. So let me just try and control that. That was tough to come to that realization and that understanding that I could not control what anyone else did, or how they believed about me, or what they thought about me, or anything else. That was tough.
But it was a safety thing.
Right.
I really thought that to be safe, I needed to control and to set that up. But again, that's where our thinking can get all twisted around, and we're not seeing clearly, and we are in denial. And I was able to go to God and start asking him to show me so I could start making changes. Because this fantasy thing, control is a huge fantasy, but there are other fantasies that we live in this reality, in my case for safety,
Right.
but it's still very messed up and difficult, because then I felt like a failure, not only when I couldn't measure up, because I definitely couldn't measure up to perfectionism, but I felt like a failure if you didn't measure up.
Right.
Or you. Well, not y'all, because y'all weren't there then. Whoever was around me.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And this idea for me was the scariest thing in the world, to try and let go of that. But what I found when I actually stepped into that was that it gave me so much more freedom. When I didn't have to think about everyone else, I could just let that go. And it was like a weight that lifted off of my shoulders. Instead of being that super scary place, what it ended up to be was freedom.
Well, and I controlled not just the people, but I controlled my entire meal plan and what went in and what went out. And but I struggled a lot with that whole control thing. And then when I couldn't control, then I would manipulate. And it was just this awful cycle that left me feeling even more empty.
Yes.
If only, I think that is also a fantasy.
Yes.
If only, wait a second, if only they would actually do what I was trying to manipulate them to do.
If only my circumstances would change. If only I had more money, I had a husband, I had children, I had.
A better job.
If only I had money. Did we say that one yet?
Yeah.
We could all use some more money. But the comedy is, so many times in our lives when we feel stuck and we're struggling and whatever, we really, instead of looking at ourselves and what we could do to change or where we could grow and expand, we sit there and look at the if onlys. And it's a fantasy world, pretending that if only everyone else or every other circumstance or every other answer to prayer even, if only that would happen, then I could, would, should. And the fact is, you can't have or do or fix any of that. You can only do your own change in perspective, in healing, in growth, in relationship with God. You can't do that for anybody else.
Well, and if only was part of my struggle with dealing with some of the sexual abuse. One particular situation, if only I would have listened to my mom, I would have gone to bed and I would have not been hurt. However, what 9-year-old listens to their parent at bedtime? You know, it took me a while to understand that concept, but I blamed myself and I stayed in that if only fantasy, because if I would have just listened, then none of that would have happened. And I had no control over what happened to me in that situation. So really, it was just that. It was a fantasy and it kept me powerless.
Wow. That's incredible. For me, what I have discovered through the if onlys and laying them down, and when I actually go through the recovery process, I am in a really scary place in my life, much scarier than I was. I mean, meaning that I have less control over anything in my life right now, but I am more centered and more at peace than I have ever been. So when I had the all of the security in the world, I still felt like, oh, well, if only this or if only that. But now that I don't have that worldly security, I actually have more peace in my life and more joy and freedom.
Well, you could use the if only I had 2 hands.
Oh, well, yeah, there's that. Life would be so much easier. Just pout.
But instead, you've maximized that and turned it into...
This is way more fun.
Well, and you can always lend a hand.
I can. Here you go.
See?
I do need it back.
I appreciate that.
Thank you to the Academy.
Anytime.
Thanks for lending a hand, Ginny.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and there's so many places I could say, if only my ex-husband hadn't cheated on me and destroyed my marriage, or if only I hadn't been born in a foreign country, or if only I had actually graduated from college, or I mean, there's so many things that just would have changed everything, except it wouldn't, because like you, Ginny, I had everything. I had the house and the company and the 2-point-something kids.
2.5 kids?
I have 3 now. But that whole everything was perfect on the outside. And that was when I was the most suicidal and the most broken.
Yeah.
So all of that isn't what changes it. It's what we have on the inside. And so now is when I don't have the money and I don't have the all of these things that if only I had them, right? So now I don't have them. And like you, I'm the happiest, most peaceful I've ever been. Way more, which is amazing. What other fantasies?
Well, there's the expectation fantasy. I don't know about you guys, but unrealistic expectations have never been a part of my issues. Okay. Let me come out of denial for a minute. Yes. Expectations, I like to place them, and I like to place really high expectations, not just on other people, more so myself, which I think fed into that progress, not perfection, because the expectation that I had on myself was way up here. And I often tell my clients, that here's your expectation and here is reality. And in between there is misery because you're just miserable because you really need reality to be in line with whatever expectations you're placing on yourself or others or even God.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's pride, because that's another fantasy that says, I don't need anybody else. I can do this all on my own. I don't need help. I've got it together.
Or I should do it all on my own. I should have it all together. So I have to do it on my own. That was my pride in that. If I asked for help, that was the scariest thing in the world. I had to do it on my own, which was that fantasy that I had, that it was all on my shoulders.
So it's more than just being a strong-willed person.
That's
pride. Man, I'm learning a whole lot of things today.
We've been learning a whole lot of things for a long time
Yes.
and living it and changing. But that's what's amazing about this healing journey, and it being a process and it being progress and having grace for ourselves, is that it doesn't need to be this perfect, exact science. It is a messy, real, growing, stretching, learning, leveling up, sliding back sometimes process that ultimately gets us further and further ahead in our journey, more healed, closer to God. It's so amazing that way. And here we are getting to share that while we're continuing our own journey and making more progress. And we will get to see y'all next week. And I'm excited because we have more baby steps that you get to have to keep moving forward in your recovery and your healing and your journey closer to God.
Have a great and a blessed week.
We all are hurting. We all need healing because we're all broken.
There's a lot of brokenness within us.
I struggled with drugs and alcohol.
Drugs, alcohol, and food.
Drugs and alcohol.
Drug addiction, pornography.
Pornographic thinking.
Cocaine addiction.
When I received a DUI, I needed a medical detox.
It was time to get the eating disorder under control.
I was very angry with God.
Anger and fear, primarily anger.
That pit of fear and despair.
I used to be very fearful.
Control, enabling, perfectionism.
Have anger or fear control me.
I didn't want to be the one in control anymore.
I lived in deceit and lies.
I actually had an affair. Parenting alone.
I have been parenting alone for about 7 years, but I've been divorced for almost 3.
I was divorced.
People-pleasing, body image issues.
Codependency.
I think I was in a place where I felt like I didn't matter and I wasn't good enough. I was living out in abusive relationships.
The abuse started in my life when I was 2.
Trauma. At the age of 5, I was sexually molested.
I am a survivor of sexual abuse and rape.
My uncle who had sexually abused me.
My mother was raped, and out of that, I was conceived.
Abandoned. Betrayal.
At about 6 years old, I began to be kicked out and have to rake in the trunks of cars for a place to sleep.
Emotional abuse, physical abuse, and psychological abuse. Childhood sexual abuse damages you, spirit, soul, and body.
I felt a lot of shame. I felt a lot of guilt.
Who would want to work with a criminal?
It was just shame and guilt, shame and guilt. I was in the middle of self-harming behaviors.
Self-harm or self-sabotage or holding myself back.
Self-mutilation.
My mother committed suicide. I tried to commit suicide.
I physically felt like I was going to die.
I think we all are broken.
I realized that I really wasn't alone.
And all of us need healing.
You can be healed. You can have a brand new life.
I've been there, and there is hope, and there is healing.
I already have the victory.
It's available, that is possible. Maybe limitless.
And when I started introducing Jesus into other areas of my life and started asking him to work in other areas of my life, it just enhanced my recovery more.
Then we can move forward in the trust and love of God, and nothing can stop us from reaching the wholeness that we need to be able to impact the world around us.
But God can add that miraculous intervention that takes it away from being just a management system or treating symptoms, and actually go into those deep broken places and bring healing.
What was missing was the spiritual part of it.
But I hadn't known him as rescuer until he started to pull me out of that pit of fear and despair.
I just see my Heavenly Father is just perfect and holy and loves me so unconditionally.
When you have God Almighty, the creator of heaven and earth, when he comes in, when you allow the Spirit to come in, that God-given hole is filled with the Spirit of God.
I started to love myself and see myself through his eyes.
No performance, no perfectionism, no people pleasing.
I have that joy, and it does get me through everything.
You know, our mind and our will and our emotions is where a huge battle is taking place.
I remember telling Satan, you have messed with the wrong little woman. I had to learn to replace my negative self-labels, homewrecker, whore, failure, tainted, terrible mom. I am who God says I am.
I am an overcomer. I am victorious. I am empowered. I am forgiven. I am free. I am blessed. I am favored. I'm anointed. I'm chosen. I'm strong. I speak with authority. I walk with authority. I talk with authority. I teach with authority.
Do you want to be free? I mean, experience true freedom.
There is a program that works if you actually do it properly, honestly, thoroughly. It works.
And we can apply those strategies as we go forth into battle.
And if you have the right tools, you can get the job done.
A tangible tool, reminders, until you get reprogrammed.
You do it one little step at a time.
Having those steps in my life helped me to find freedom.
The healing process of breaking free from the victim mentality.
Life gets really, really good